The candle between us flickered as I set down my fork, heart steady, hands dry. I'd rehearsed it all week, how I'd say it, when I'd look him in the eye, how I wouldn't flinch. "I'm leaving you," I said, lifting the wine glass to my lips. "I've fallen in love with someone wealthier." No apology, no stammer. I said it clean. He blinked once, twice maybe. Then he said, "Great," like I just told him the weather was nice. He waved the waiter with 2 fingers, signed the bill without checking the amount, and stood, calm, casual, too calm. I waited for the reaction, raised voice, bitter questions, something. But he just reached for my coat like we were leaving a movie. At the door, he held it open, nodded once, "Best of luck," and turned. Not toward me, not back, just walked, no stumble, no hesitation. I stood there alone, coat on, purse in hand, surrounded by clinking glasses and murmured conversations that suddenly felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. If you're still listening and any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, hit like and subscribe. Most people just listen in silence, but the one click tells the team these stories matter. The taxi ride home felt colder than it should have. I expected my phone to blow up. Missed calls, questions, maybe even one of his long, typed-out texts full of half-finished thoughts and sentences he'd delete and rewrite 5 times before sending. Instead, nothing. I stared out the window and checked again. No messages. By the time I got home, the porch light was off. The bedroom door was open. His shoes were gone. I pulled open the dresser, slow, like it might be a trick, like he'd jump out and beg me not to go, to rethink, to stay. But the drawers were empty. Closet, half the hangers gone. Bathroom, his toothbrush, razor, cologne, gone. The garage shelf where he kept his tools, just dust and an outline where his old duffel used to be. There was a single piece of paper on the kitchen counter, folded in thirds, no envelope, no name. "Thanks for the dinner," it said in his handwriting. "Enjoy your upgrade." I stood there for a long time, just rereading that one line. Then I noticed what was underneath it. 2 documents, both notarized. The first removed his name from the house title. The second outlined a complete division of our assets, signed by both of us, effective immediately. I didn't even remember signing. It must have been last year, during that brief scare when he'd been sick, and suddenly obsessed with getting our affairs in order. "No contest," it said in the margins. I sat down at the kitchen table, wine still in my bloodstream, but the buzz long gone. The house felt unfamiliar, like someone had replaced the air with something heavier. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't begged, he hadn't said a single cruel word, but somehow that made it worse, because in my head, I was always the one leaving. I was the one who was supposed to have the final word, the dramatic exit. Instead, he walked away so completely, so cleanly, that it made my chest feel hollow, like I'd broken something that didn't even try to break back, and that was the part that scared me the most. The next morning, I pulled into the driveway expecting a storm. I'd stayed at a hotel just for the night, thinking I needed space to let things settle. In my head, I'd painted a dozen versions of what I'd find. A suitcase by the door, shouted questions, maybe even tears. He never handled surprises well, or so I thought. I slipped the key into the lock, pushed the door open, and waited for the tension to hit me like it always did after a fight. But there was no fight waiting. The house was still, not quiet like a pause, quiet like something had ended. I walked into the bedroom. The closet door was open. My dresses still hung in their neat row, but the other half, empty. No belts, no shirts, no rows of cleanly arranged jackets. Hangers dangled bare, the wood floor beneath them too clean. I opened the top drawer of the dresser. Empty. The one below it, just a single spare button and a receipt from 3 years ago tucked in the corner. No socks, no undershirts, not even the watch he used to wind before bed. The bathroom was worse. His side of the counter had always been cluttered. Razor, aftershave, that chipped ceramic tray he'd had since college. Gone. Drawers, clean. No noise when I opened them, just that hollow wood sound. I moved through the house faster now. Garage, shelves wiped, gear missing. The toolbox, the duffel, the raincoat he always kept by the door in case storms rolled in while he was out, all of it gone. That's when I saw the note on the kitchen counter. Simple, folded in thirds, his handwriting, like always, precise, angled, oddly calm. Thanks for the dinner. Enjoy your upgrade. I stared at the words, read them 3 times. My stomach dropped, not because it was cruel, it wasn't, but because it was complete, like a door quietly locking behind you. Beside the note were 2 sheets. The first, a notarized removal of his name from the deed. Our home, my home now, signed, sealed, dated yesterday. The second, an official division of assets, no contest. Pre-agreed terms already executed, all numbers tallied, accounts split, even the tax implications noted in the margins. Like he'd planned for this, like he'd known it was coming. I sat down on the edge of the couch, still holding the papers. The silence in the room felt sharper now, not empty, final. I reached for my phone, dialed his number, straight to voicemail. Hey, can we talk? I didn't expect this. I hesitated. Call me back? I didn't expect the words to sound so small, no buzz, no callback. I opened our shared calendar on my laptop, blank. Photos, all his gone. Albums we built together, still there, but stripped of him. Like he'd pulled a thread and undone himself from everything without leaving a mark. I thought there'd be questions, accusations, a performance at least, but what I found was worse than anger. He hadn't fought. He hadn't even paused. He just walked out of the frame, and somehow that made me feel like I was the one who'd been left. The first day, I gave him space. The second day, I sent a message. Let's talk, please. Read, no reply. The third day, I called, straight to voicemail. I left one, then another, carefully worded, like stepping across a frozen lake. I didn't mean for it to be cruel. I think we both said less than we meant. Maybe we can at least talk through the paperwork. He didn't answer, not once. I tried the old routes, our shared calendar, empty. His email bounced back a quiet autoresponder. Account closed. I scrolled our photo archive and realized the albums had been cut cleanly in half. The thumbnails looked the same until you opened them. My face still smiled, but his had vanished, cropped, deleted, replaced, a digital ghosting I didn't know was possible. I asked my attorney to reach out. She got a reply the same day. Filed, executed, no contest, no objections. He'd already submitted everything, court forms, financial disclosures, spousal agreements, every line item pre-filled, every signature already inked. It wasn't just fast, it was finished. Is he trying to provoke something? I asked her. She just shook her head. No, he's letting it close. But something in me twisted. I couldn't let it be that simple. It had to be messier. He had to feel something. Even anger would have made more sense than silence. A week after the dinner, I went to the cafe I loved, the corner one with the soft jazz and the almond croissants he always said were overpriced. I wanted the ritual, the comfort. I needed to feel like at least something was normal. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard someone behind me. Didn't expect to see you here, said a familiar voice. It was Leah, one of those mutual friends who'd somehow stayed neutral. Hey, I said, trying to smile. She sat down, glanced at her phone, then looked at me. I saw him. I froze. Where? At LAX. Tuesday morning. He was boarding. Just 2 suitcases, no carry-on, no laptop, just gone. Gone where? She shrugged. Didn't say. Just nodded when I waved. Looked lighter than I've ever seen him. I sat in stunned silence as she stirred her tea. The jazz in the background, the clink of her spoon, it all felt distant. At home that night, I logged into our old subscription services, Netflix, Spotify, even that grocery delivery account we always argued about. All of them had changed ownership. My card was on file now, his name gone. Then I checked the shared doc folders, his signature contracts, old scans, anything with his name. He hadn't deleted them, he just moved them, every folder labeled, archived, transferred, closed. It wasn't spite, it wasn't pettiness. It was precision. It hit me then. He hadn't walked away in a daze. He'd planned this, mapped the exits, traced the shadows, and erased himself like a professional. He didn't just leave the table. He raced the table, wiped his fingerprints from the room, and made sure when I reached for him again, there'd be nothing but air. The morning of the hearing, I felt composed. Not calm, composed. hair pulled back, sharp blazer. I wore confidence like armor, even if it was thinner than it used to be. My attorney, Mark, was his usual smirking self, leaning back in the hallway chair outside the courtroom, flipping through the folder like this was a game he'd already won. "Don't worry," he said, not even looking up. "This will be easy." I nodded once. I wanted to believe him. We stepped inside. Wooden benches, buzzing lights, a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My ex, no, he, was already seated. No suit, just a clean black sweater and slate gray slacks. He didn't look nervous. Didn't even look at me. The clerk asked for the documents. Mark stood, that usual confidence dripping from his voice like syrup. "Your Honor, we've reviewed the petitioner's financial disclosure and believe a fair settlement is simple and clear." He handed the file to the judge, then made the mistake of glancing at the other lawyer. A quiet man I hadn't met before, pale tie, no ring. He didn't say a word, just pushed a single binder forward. The judge opened it, flipped a few pages, and paused. "Mr. Carver," he said, addressing my ex's attorney, "these valuations, are they accurate?" "They've been independently reviewed and are supported by documents in the annex, Your Honor." Mark leaned over, eyes narrowing. "Wait, what valuations?" The binder turned. Mark stared, and I watched something shift in his face. Inside, a startup. Not one I knew about. No press coverage, no launch party, just an LLC in his name, quietly funded during the last 18 months of our marriage. It was now valued at just over $12.3 million thanks to a recent funding round. I scanned the line items. He owned 84% of it. My mouth opened, closed. The next page showed property records, a second residence, fully purchased, debt-free, not in our hometown, somewhere coastal judging by the city code, title, his name only, acquired 6 months ago, and then the trust, executed last year, quietly, legally, shielding all post-filing appreciation of his assets from joint claim, entirely valid, entirely out of reach. I couldn't breathe, not fully, because in all the silence, in every unanswered call, every document filed before I could react, he'd never once asked for anything. He didn't argue. He just moved, quietly, precisely. Months before I said a word at that dinner table, he had already shifted the ground beneath my feet, not with drama, with strategy. Mark cleared his throat, clearly stalling. "We will need time to review these materials." His lawyer nodded once, calm. "Take all the time you need." The judge glanced at me then, almost sympathetically. "We'll reconvene next Thursday. Both sides are expected to return with revised proposals." I didn't say anything, couldn't. Outside, Mark pulled me aside, his voice lower than usual. "Did you know about any of this?" I shook my head. It felt heavy. "I thought he was just some soft mid-level project guy," he muttered. I looked back at the courtroom door, still closed, still silent. "He's not soft," I said. "He's surgical." And for the first time since that night at the restaurant, I wasn't sure who had actually left whom. The one thing I walked away with was the house. It had always been mine, really, at least in spirit. I picked the paint colors, the countertops, the chandelier above the stairs. He joked once that I'd married the floor plan before I married him. And when the prenup was drafted years ago, back when everything still felt like forever, it had been clear. In the event of separation, the property would default to me, no argument, no clause hidden in fine print. So when the dust settled after the first hearing, I called my sister and said it plainly. I got the house. She cheered. "Well, that's something." And I agreed. It was something, a small win, a place I could control. Familiar, solid. I moved back in that weekend, walked from room to room with a glass of wine, turned on every lamp. The silence felt less haunting when I reminded myself it was my silence now. I even lit a candle, my favorite one he never liked, too strong, too floral. I let it burn for hours. I'd expected grief. Instead, I felt the faint hum of power. I'd stayed, he'd left. I had the keys. Then the first call came. It was Monday morning, a roofing contractor. I barely remembered the name until he reminded me he'd done the patch job 3 years ago after that hailstorm. "Just wanted to follow up," he said. "Noticed the warranty expired last quarter. Saw some lifting tiles on a drone sweep we did last week. Figured I'd give you a heads up before water gets in. I blinked. We renewed that, didn't we? No, ma'am. Only valid for 36 months unless extended. It wasn't. I hung up, made a note. Tuesday, I went to do laundry in the basement. It smelled off damp. I followed the scent to the corner behind the old storage shelf. Mildew spread across the drywall like a slow rot. I called a plumber. An hour later, he was shaking his head. Looks like a flood from back in February. Didn't dry right. Mold's in the studs now. But we had insurance, he frowned. For flooding? Not according to the records. You'd have needed an extra policy. Didn't have one. I felt something drop in my chest. That night, I turned on the heat. Nothing. Just a low metallic whine from the vents. The next morning, the technician came, poked around the basement unit, scribbled on a clipboard, then handed me a form. Ma'am, he said, this system's red tagged, carbon monoxide risk. It's not just out, it's dangerous. How dangerous? You'll need a full replacement soon. We're required to notify the city if it's not addressed within 30 days. I stared at the red sticker, peeling slightly at the edge. It looked like it was smirking. Thursday, I called the bank. Hi, I said. I just wanted to check the details on my mortgage. I need to know the interest rate. The woman paused, typed something, then said, your refinance from last October set the fixed rate at 6.9%. You should have received the revised payment schedule. I blinked. Wait, I refinanced? Yes, ma'am. The document was signed with only your name on file. He'd refinanced the house in my name, before the split, before the dinner, before I'd even noticed he'd started packing in his mind. I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor. The tile was cold. The house I'd won wasn't a prize. It was a timed grenade. Every creak, every pipe, every silent system waiting to collapse. And he hadn't lifted a finger to stop it. He hadn't needed to. He'd simply handed me the matchbook and walked away. I posted the beach photo late at night. Tan lines, wine glass, sunset glow. I chose the one where my hair looked wind-blown but not wild. The kind that says freedom, not loneliness. The caption was light, vague, something about new chapters. I watched the likes roll in. At first, it felt good. A few hearts, fire emojis, the usual surface praise. Then the comments began to shift. Looks peaceful. Where's he these days? I ignored it. 2 more came within the hour. He deserved better. Brave of you to post this. I deleted that last one. But the silence that followed was worse. People I used to joke with in group chats, quiet. Friends I expected to double tap, to send me DMs hyping the outfit or asking about the trip. They didn't even view the story. It was like someone had dimmed the lights in my social circle without warning. A week later, I flew home for my cousin Jess's wedding. It should have been a safe space. Familiar faces, soft music, champagne on silver trays. I wore the gold dress he once complimented in Paris. That trip now felt like someone else's life. The moment I walked in, I knew. No one asked where he was, but no one looked at me long either. People smiled too quickly, then turned. My aunt said I looked healthy. My cousin's new fiancé nodded politely, but didn't ask how I'd been. The bride barely met my eyes. And when I approached the bar, the server passed me twice before pouring. At the dinner table, I found myself next to an empty seat. When the best man told a joke about marriage being the ultimate team sport, I smiled, but no one else at the table did. They looked down. Forks moved in slow, awkward clinks. After dinner, I stepped outside for air. My father was leaning on the railing, staring into the night. He didn't say hello. Dad? I said softly. He nodded, still not facing me. Didn't expect to see you come alone. I waited. He didn't elaborate. I forced a small laugh. Well, you know how life goes. His silence was heavier than the wind. My sister found me a little later. She hugged me harder than she needed to. A press of her arms around my shoulders, a long inhale near my ear. When she pulled back, she didn't let go right away. Just looked at me. You okay? She asked. I'm fine. I lied. She nodded. But the way her eyes searched my face said otherwise. I went back inside, and for the rest of the night, I held a half-full glass and pretended not to notice the empty chairs near me. The side conversations, the way people didn't mention his name, but also didn't ask about mine. Somewhere in the back of the room, I caught a cousin scrolling on her phone. A photo flashed by, one of me and him from years ago. She tilted the screen toward her friend, whispered something, then quickly locked it. The music played. People danced. I stayed seated because it was becoming clear I wasn't the main character in the story they were all remembering. Not anymore. I was the footnote they had started to quietly move past. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly thicker than usual, and had no stamp, no name, no address, just placed there by hand. For a second, I thought it was from a neighbor, maybe a note about the hedges or the parking spot I was using more lately. I opened it with my thumb, standing by the mailbox like always. But when I pulled out the single page inside, I knew immediately who it was from. There was no greeting, no signature, just one sentence in his handwriting. I was building a life. You were measuring wallets. I didn't breathe for a second. The words weren't angry. They weren't even bitter, just final. And behind them, I could feel everything he hadn't said in the restaurant, everything he hadn't shouted or thrown or demanded when I told him I was leaving. It was all there, in ink, cool, precise. Taped to the bottom of the page was a photograph, a small one, matte finish, clearly printed from a phone. It was us, that night, the night I told him. The tablecloth was white, my wine glass half full. I wore that navy silk blouse he liked, and he was smiling, not big, not fake, just enough. The kind of smile people wear when they're trying to remain human in the face of something they already see coming. But I wasn't looking at him. In the photo, my eyes were angled past his shoulder, my mouth, mid-sentence, hand gesturing. I looked distant, engaged with something else, someone else. It wasn't staged. It wasn't caught at the worst moment. It was real. And that's what made it hit. Because I remembered that exact moment, the way the waiter hovered, the soft jazz in the background. I thought I had the upper hand. I thought I was being brave, honest. I thought he didn't see, but he saw everything. He saw how I'd already detached, how the decision wasn't sudden, how it had grown in my silences, my eye rolls, the way I'd stopped asking about his day months ago. He had been documenting it all quietly, not in photos, in memory. I sat on the porch steps and stared at that note, the wind lifting the corner of the page like it wanted to carry it off. But I held on. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to call it petty, dramatic. But instead, my throat closed because for the first time, I saw how small I'd become in his world before he ever walked out of mine. I thought he was oblivious, stuck in his routines, never noticing the way I began to drift. But the truth was sharper. He didn't miss it. He measured every inch of my withdrawal, cataloged it, and then, without ceremony, he let go, quietly, completely. And now, weeks later, all that remained was a sentence on paper and a photo that told me more than I ever wanted to admit. He hadn't been clinging. I had been discarding. And now, finally, I was the one left staring at something already gone. The envelope was thick, expensive, gold foil lining, my full name embossed in raised print on the front, no sender listed, inside an invitation to the Aspera Foundation annual gala, formal attire, black tie, cocktails at 6, program at 7:30, benefactor, Aspera Ventures, his company. The name alone made my fingers go numb for a second. I read the line twice. Aspera Ventures cordially invites you. It wasn't anger I felt, or regret. It was something colder, the sting of not being needed to prove anything anymore, the silence after the last page turns. I almost threw it out, but I didn't. I RSVP'd the same night, typed my full name carefully into the reply form, not out of pride, out of something else, some quiet desperation to see what I no longer had the ability to affect. 2 weeks later, I stood outside the glass ballroom of the Marquette Hotel, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. The dress was sleek, a rental, label I couldn't afford anymore, tailored one size too tight. Inside, the room was full of polished people with expensive smiles, no name tags, just knowing glances, discreet nods, the kind of event where you either belong or you don't. I kept my head high and walked in. The place shimmered, gold light, soft strings, glasses clinking like distant wind chimes. I recognized a few faces from the industry from before. No one greeted me. But no one told me to leave either. That was worse. Then I heard his name. Let's welcome Evan Hart, founder of Aspera Ventures. Applause, controlled, respectful, a room that already knew what he'd done. He stepped onto the stage, simple black suit, no tie, no need to perform. His posture did the talking. Calm, straight, grounded. I felt something sink inside me. He spoke clearly, not long. Thanked the guests, the board, the mentors who'd believed in quiet ambition. No buzzwords, no arrogance. He never looked in my direction. At his side, just behind the podium, stood a woman, not flashy, not clinging to his arm. She wore a deep emerald gown with sleeves, hair tucked behind one ear, a small pendant at her neck. She didn't smile much. She didn't need to. She simply watched the crowd like she'd been beside him for years. And I knew instantly she wasn't temporary. She was real. The kind of presence that doesn't chase attention. It simply doesn't flinch when it's given. They walked off stage together without hurry, without looking back. People moved toward them, not frantically, intentionally, like gravity pulling in. I stayed by the bar, sipping something I couldn't taste, and not a single person asked who I was, not one whispered my name. There was no drama, no confrontation, just a slow, suffocating clarity. He hadn't sent the invitation as a message. He hadn't needed to. This wasn't about proving anything to me. This was about living a life I no longer fit into, and watching it from the outside hurt more than any letter ever could. I waited until most of the guests had gone. The air outside the ballroom was cooler, quieter, just the soft rustle of gowns, the fading hum of string music echoing through the marble. He stood alone near the valet station, watching the street. Hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, a man with nothing to chase. I walked toward him before I could second-guess myself. "Evan," I said. He turned slowly. No surprise, no anger, just awareness. "I miss you," I said, my voice barely steady. "I made a mistake." There was a pause, just long enough for hope to flicker. Then he shook his head, not with cruelty, but with certainty. "You didn't make a mistake," he said. "You made a choice." I opened my mouth, but he kept going. "You wanted wealth," he said calmly, "and now you know the cost." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a jab. It was a mirror. I reached for his hand, on instinct, something ancient, muscle memory from before. I threw it all away. He stepped back, not dramatically, just enough. And then he said it. "You left during dinner," he said, his voice as quiet as the wind moving past the columns. "I started living after dessert. I don't remember breathing." A car pulled up. His name was called softly by the valet. He nodded once and turned toward it, slipping into the back seat with that same quiet grace that had haunted me for weeks. He didn't look back, and I didn't follow, because that moment under the soft glow of streetlights and the ache of everything unsaid, I understood there would be no long conversation, no last apology, no second chance. There would only be distance and silence, and the cold realization that by the time I reached for him, he'd already let go. The courtroom smelled like paper and polish, stale quiet pressed between years of stories no one wanted to tell. It was supposed to be routine, procedural, nothing left to dispute, no objections, no open wounds, just final signatures. I sat beside my attorney, spine straight, lipstick muted. I'd worn gray, neutral, respectable. I told myself I was ready, that I'd accepted it, but something in me was still holding on. He sat across from me. Evan, clean suit, steady breath, same impossible calm, no glance in my direction, not even when I shifted, hoping he'd feel it. That old, desperate signal. "See me." The judge flipped through the file and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. Let's proceed." Then Evan's attorney slid a final binder across the table. Thick, tidy, a black tab labeled Addendum. "What's this?" my lawyer asked, already frowning. "Supplemental documentation," the man replied. "Tax filings, asset disclosures, future projections for the court's record." My lawyer opened it, and I leaned in, line after line. Portfolio shifts, 3 LLCs fully acquired, stock options that had matured 2 weeks ago. Perfect timing. A pre-seed investment in a fintech startup now valued at $80 million. Evan held 12%. Quietly, the trust, reinvested, structured for growth, not safety, mapped to a 10-year trajectory already underway. His net worth had quadrupled, and I had walked away when it was still a seed. My lawyer's pen tapped against the table. These weren't disclosed earlier. Evan's counsel smiled politely. They weren't required. The assets didn't exist in this form until after the separation was filed. Our financials reflect that timeline. He'd planned for this, not just the end, the rebuild, the ascent. I stared at the columns, the charts, the signatures. None of it was vindictive. None of it screamed, "Look what you lost." It was worse than that. It was indifferent. I wasn't part of the story anymore. The judge cleared his throat. "If there are no objections, I'll sign off on the final decree." No one spoke. My fingers found the last page, the one I was meant to sign. Simple. A date, a signature line. But I couldn't move the pen. Because across the table sat a man I once thought I knew. A man who used to hold my hand under restaurant tables, who used to fold my laundry because he said he liked the way I paired socks. He never shouted, never begged, never slammed a door. He just watched the wave come and built a higher shore behind it, quietly. I finally signed. My hand trembled slightly. The ink dried fast. Evan stood, buttoned his jacket, nodded once to the judge, and walked out. The door closed behind him with the softest click, and for the first time since I'd said "I'm leaving you," I felt it. Not power, not freedom, just the vast, echoing space where his silence had been waiting all along.